how to qualify for Kona Hawaii Ironman Triathlon. Did this grab your attention? I'm sure there's loads of videos out on YouTube on the magic bullet, the silver dose to try and get yourself to Hawaii. In this video, I'm going to try and break down my experiences as an athlete, having been there 3 times, having coached a few athletes myself over the last 10-15 years to get to Hawaii, and then now how the sport is evolving and changing, and some things that you need to try really consider, because I get asked this fairly often. What's the best pathway perhaps to get qualifying? So if this is of interest for you, listen up. I'll bring out the whiteboard. We'll go through a few scenarios, and I hope it really helps you decide going into the beginning of the season, well, the winter season, shall I say, into the beginning of the 2025 season, of choosing your right races, because that's ultimately what it comes down to. Okay, so back in 2009 and 11 when I went for the first time, and then the second in 11, it was a different ball game. I think that's my view for how it is to qualify nowadays. Fast forward to 2022 when I went, pretty much 10, 11 years later, with COVID being one of them in the middle there, towards the end. It's getting increasingly more difficult, as you probably know, unless you're just new to the sport and you're intrigued by watching all the coverage of Hawaii. This ultimate destination for the cream of the crop age group and professional athletes to showcase your Ironman ability in the heat, in the lava fields, where it all started in 1978. Which happens to be my date of birth as well. So it's certainly a huge endeavor which takes over family life. It disrupts relationships if you have children like myself. There's an impact, there's a cost benefit here, but we know with a really good support system, a really guided coach that understands holistic health, nutrition, fueling strategies, really get good support from a company like Precision Fuel and Hydration. Get your hydration needs, requirements sorted. Working with a physiologist, understanding from the top down the strength. All these things add up. Understanding how to get the most out of your hours, smart training. It all adds up to a beautiful recipe which ultimately hopefully leads to the right qualification race, the right mix of training for you, individual strengths and weaknesses, and finding out what's your best recipe and best race. Is it going to Europe? Is it going south to an April race, Ironman South Africa? Is it doing something in the UK? There's so much to choose from. So listen up. What I'm going to do now is go through some fairly simple parts to the equation, if you like, that I think is quite pertinent. Course selection, travel. Going to break down a bit around the swim, bike and run, some parameters, some thoughts around that, strengths, weaknesses, to try and help you make some decisions on how to start this process of qualifying, because of course that's probably the hardest part for most of us. I don't have any special secrets or silver magic training plan if that's what you're after, but this might just help people that are really intrigued, that haven't been to Kona, or perhaps you've been chasing it for many years. I've certainly been there sort of 2012, 13, 14, even into 15, really couldn't get qualified again, flying around the world a little bit, chasing some races. And then it was only after 2020 into 2022 that I managed to get back there. So almost 10 years pretty much after, whether there was my age, my conditioning, my training methods, life, family, child, and you know, it's a perfect storm. That's exactly what it is. And then you actually end up sometimes doing more, which is counterproductive, and you skip out the important bits. And that's what is really important. And I mentioned that a lot on my previous videos. So as you're probably aware, timing is everything. There's different ways of doing it. If you planning an October, November, December race to qualify for the following year, this is quite a nice strategy, because you get in the Northern Hemisphere, you get to train through summer to try and peak at a European race, or you have to travel potentially to the US. And the last race is, of course, Western Australia, which is hot, flat and fast, and the Aussies race really hard, aggressively on the bike. Problems there is, depending what age group you are, and male and female, there's only a few slots per age group, and the older you get, the less they are. This is the problem that most of us have. Female, and there's generally only one slot. So that's one way of doing it. And then bear in mind the World Champs for the current year is often around here, September, October. So those athletes might not be present in that. So you've thought of that. That's fine. That's a perfect scenario, because then you have 12 months, pretty much 11 or 12 months to then think about, prepare, book accommodation. Do you know what I mean? Not have to go through a whole build. You now entering winter in the Northern Hemisphere. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, that's a different kettle of fish. You've got to then train in the winter months for Kona. So there's pros and cons. I always like to try and pick the right course. Now this might sound fairly obvious. Let's just chat about the swim, for example. Most triathletes aren't the most, how should we say, prolific swimmers. They don't come from a pool background. You know, they're not swimming 53, 55 minutes for an Ironman regularly. That's what I'd consider, a very good swim background. You want to try choose a course. You've got lake swims, freshwater. You've got seawater, rough, chop, currents. You've got river swims, for example, Ironman California, downstream river. That means everyone swims fast, but it means it takes less out of you. So that's generally October time, super fast course. But then, of course, all the Americans go there with the view to qualify for the following year. So we know that for the average age grouper that's competitive, I think, depending what, if you're 24 years old, you might swim a bit quicker. If you're 65 plus, you're going to swim slower than this. To be competitive, to get out the water fresh, you probably have to swim 60 to 65 minutes as an average. You could still swim. I see people qualify on a 1:10, a 1 hour 10 swim, but that means it depends what happens on your bike. Of course, you'll be biking quite a lot of solo stuff there, but you're potentially a strong biker, so that's fine. That's not set in stone. You've got to choose this based on your strength. I think a course will, so that's C, to help you with buoyancy, less chance of getting unstuck with currents and sun and chop and wind and swell. Having grown up in South Africa, I quite enjoy that, and waves, and I've swum a lot in open water. It depends on your background. Beginners, you haven't probably experienced a lot of that. Certainly if you've been brought up in England, you probably haven't done a lot of, and again, I'm talking sort of inland in England. If you're brought up on the coast, you've probably been exposed, Devon, Cornwall, quite a lot of sea. And it's really quite interesting coming from a pool to get to open water, the differences in your stroke and being in a big group. So I think the big factor, and I speak to my athletes a bit about like, well, let's look at the swim. What are the environments? What is going to be super cold? Are you okay in the cold? Lake Taupo, Ironman in March, first one of the season. It's cold. Yes, it's summer, but the water's cold in New Zealand. Generally, I know I shut down. I'm a fairly skinny athlete. The cold is hard, even though you're wearing a wetsuit. It takes a long time to get blood flow back to the muscles. It's tough on the body. Where I've qualified in Bolton in the UK, summer, but a freshwater lake, fairly moderate temperature. I've qualified in South Africa, which is a fresh swim, but it's not super cold in summer. And there you're dealing with quite a lot of swell. So swell, currents, temperature, chop. These are all things you need to factor. Are you going to be able to execute your fitness in the environment? So that's going to be a big thing. And the other thing, this is a key point, wetsuit. Now, weaker swimmers, if you're more like 68, 72 minutes for an Ironman, or you're not sure, you just, that's roughly about 140, 138 per 100. A wetsuit is going to help you with your buoyancy. It's going to make your whole swim feel much easier. Of course, you go quicker, generally speaking, and it's obviously going to keep you slightly warmer. So is it going to be a wetsuit swim? European races in the middle of summer is pretty much non-wetsuit swims, and then we'll get to that in a sec about qualification and how hard it is, but you generally need to be very comfortable without a wetsuit, and that's people with a swimming background. Hawaii, of course, is non-wetsuit swim. So yes, you will eventually have to be comfortable just in a swim skin, but we're talking about how to get to Kona and the qualification. You've got to consider these parameters and the logistics around sighting and general ease of getting around the swim with the least amount of effort, and what that's going to do to you, because it really has a knock-on effect to your back, to how you feel. Is it a long beach run coming into transition? Is it going to be just extra running? Some transitions are up to 1 kilometer to get to your bike. No word of a lie. 4 to 5 minutes of running. That doesn't suit some people if they're not a super quick runner. Okay, so that's the swim. I think I've covered the course. I'm going to come back to timing because that's actually critical. That's one of the main things we're going to talk about as well. That's the year before pre-season, if you like, pre-winter timing of a race. Yes, you can still qualify in September because the cutoff is generally October. It depends where in the world you, of course, can go for that. All right, part 2. Then we speak about when to choose the right race once the season started. March in New Zealand, April you're moving to South Africa, Brazil. I don't know all the races, but there's one every month, a few a month from March onwards. And the closer you get, of course, to August cutoff time, so you've got March to August, of course, the race is in October. Oh, sorry. You obviously want to try and keep it as early as possible so you can recover, build back up again, and race be fresh in October. But you don't have a choice if you've chosen some of these races in early in the year, March, April, but which means you have to be really fit in January and February to target a March, April. Around here, May and June are your key big months to perform. You need a good 8 to 12 week block, guys. You don't Ironman train all year round. This is key to consider in your life, because ultimately I'm talking to most of you that are working or have a family, or you might be taking a time out, so you can absolutely choose what you want. Or you might be 55, 60 years old and you have the luxury of training when you feel and take as much holiday as you want. If you're running your own business or slowing down with life, which is fantastic. I deal with a few of those people. And then you can pick and choose a little bit more. Here, it's kind of mainly Europe-based. Here, there's sort of Southern Hemisphere. Of course, your South Africa, your New Zealand. The pros and cons of going to a championship race. Yes, you get a bigger field and the slots are more available. All right, so the bigger age groups, the 35, the 40, 45, you will get more slots per male, a little bit for female, but it's always less. And of course, now that they're split male and female, it'll always just be male for Kona, female for Nice the following year. This might change as of 2025. We hope to wait and see. Europe, we found, I've never qualified in Europe, and it's very, very difficult. You sometimes strike lucky, you get a top 10, and there's a roll down. In a European race, your Austrias, your Copenhagen, Sweden, Switzerland, it's very hard to qualify. Uber bikers, certainly the Germans, in the German races, Frankfurt, they are posting 4-hour 30 bikes, 4-hour 40 bikes in the men's age group, which means you have to back up a run, 3:10, 3:15. It's super hard. I would try target a little bit of travel earlier in the year, which means you need to start your build November, December. And then you can, of course, recover. Yes, there's a cost involved. And then you've got more time to book cheaper accommodation and, of course, prepare and do heat acclimation work and have a break in between. You almost do a mid-season break really early. So this is key considerations, but back to the course selection, this will be obviously fresh water, open water swim. It will help move you on in your decision process. Bike. Okay, I'm going to spend a bit more time on this because it's the most important thing. We all know they generally like to make some bike courses hilly, certainly in the UK, and the fast ones are your Copenhagen, Sweden's, Barcelona's, Yeah, those ones that pop up to my head straight away. You're going to get the Uber bikers. Now, if you are a strong biker, and you know if you are because you've been doing it for a while and you can push some really sustained watts in a time trial position, that's going to really favor you as long as you can run off a fast bike, a flat bike. Yes, it might look good on paper, a 5-hour bike or a 5:15, but ultimately you've still got to run a marathon, of course, and generally it's a flat bike course, flat run is normally the case. Heli courses, of course, lighter athletes, power to weight ratio do a little bit better, and sometimes the runs, for example in the UK, it's not flat, Wales and now the new Leeds ones. You have to be pretty good at both bike and run on hills. That's okay, we can train for that. You start moving June, July for these races, certainly July for some of the European races, and you're cutting it fine. But the good news is you've obviously had all these months to prepare for it. So you've got to choose what your strengths are for a course and weakness to try and work out, is it going to be hilly? Is it going to be a flat course that's going to are you chasing a time or are you chasing position? Generally, people will choose a flat course for times, of course, and it looks good on paper. But we started going 8:45, 9 hours, 9:15 for, these age groups around 35, 40, 45. Of course, it slows down once you hit 50 to 55, but not much, male and female. I would really consider, depending if you are using a TT bike, of course, that goes without saying, a flat course, even a hilly course, TT bike is always faster. But you need to be comfortable, you need to be fitted, and I've mentioned in my previous videos, but if you're not aero fitted now on a TT bike, you're just losing minutes and minutes to people that everyone's doing it, and helmets, wheel choice, bike clothing, race suits, aero socks. You have to do this now to feed back into qualifying for Kona. In the past, I never used to do that, but I have it more recently in the last race. Because you get older, you're not getting necessarily faster just by training harder. You almost have to train smarter. So if you're not getting aero fitted and optimized, is that word they use, then you are wasting your time, plus also giving yourself a worse shot. You want to look at your physiology as well. Is it? Yep. So there we would get a lab test. These are things you kind of have to do now if you're wanting to qualify at Kona. You have to optimize your bike training, work out exactly where your gain is going to be made. Is it fat oxidation at the bottom end? Is it improving your LT1, your VT1? Threshold is important, but it's for endurance athletes, a VO2 max is ultimately what you want, a fairly high VO2 max, and then very efficient at the low end. You want to use as least amount of energy as possible to get around 180 Ks, not necessarily as fast. The fastest athletes is the one that it's the easiest for them. So that makes sense if you think about it. You will naturally go faster if you train and condition yourself, but you want it to cost as little amount for the body. We want to go as fast as possible, but we want to actually make it easy on the body so then you can unleash it on the run still to come. So we have to invest in physiology. We have to get the bike optimized. Then we actually have to train correctly for the demands of the specificity of your event. Flat versus a hilly course, closer to the time, the demands will be different. So work out what you would favor, what bike you're going to use. This doesn't really come into it if you're using a road bike. You're probably more suited a hilly bike course. But again, if you're qualifying for Kona or trying to, more than likely you are on a TT bike. Part 3, moving into the run. So we now have the run, the marathon, which is pretty vital. We need to come off that bike as fresh as possible, optimized with hydration and fueling, in order for us to actually execute a proper marathon. So a big factor is heat, terrain. We know, we know if you're not optimized and acclimated and living in a climate that's suited to where you're going to go race, that's going to be your undoing 100%. You can do a fair amount outside of the climate. For example, Kona itself, you're not going to train in the humidity all the time. The terrain of the run is quite critical to, I suppose, your body mass. If you're a lighter athlete, you probably find running a little bit easier. But there's a cost because, of course, the bike, it's based on what you did on the bike. If it was a flat bike and a hilly run, which normally it's a flat bike, flat run, hilly run with a flat run, or a few little bumps. Very seldom do you get hilly bike, hilly run, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. Wales and used to be Bolton, but now Leeds will be both bike and run. So know your strengths and weaknesses on the terrain, and I suppose what comes into it is how likely are you to get the mileage in to execute a really solid, depending on your age, of course. We know it's anywhere from 3 hours now to about 3:20 for a male, and about 3:15 to 3:40, quite a range I found for female, because it depends how fast their bike is. Even up to 45 years old, the 45 age group, you've got to run a 3:20. Now, of course, that's based on flat terrain. I'm not using that on a hilly race. So that's what it takes. It means your fresh marathon pace is definitely a sub 3, which is quite lightning fast, which means your first turn point, your LT1, is probably around 4:15 to 4:20 a K. Just to give you context, to be able to run something like that, bear in mind, it depends on your conditioning of the bike. That's just, I can't just assume with that you'll run that, because if you're not conditioned on the bike, you'll just end up running a 4-hour marathon with a bit of walking. The biggest thing is trying to choose, I think, a course that's going to suit you based on the environment. We know now that Ironman branded events, from a nutrition perspective and hydration, is finally got to a really nice place with Precision Hydration and Morton as for providing the fuel, which would help in the hot races, because previously we see a lot of issues with hydration in heat. Terrain you can easily train for. If you live in a flat area, you're going to have to use a treadmill. If you live in a very hilly area, you're going to have to use a treadmill to get some flat. The other thing is, I never spoke about, I've done Ironman in Boulder. Really dry air. It's at about 1,200 meters, which completely changes how you can obviously get an amount of oxygen into your bloodstream. So the pace drops, the heart rate goes up for the perceived effort, and that has a big change in how you prepare, plus also the effect on how your body's going to respond. And it's not as easy as acclimating to that as it is to heat, but you can go there 2 weeks earlier, and that seems to be helpful. That's certainly from my experience. But if you just drop in the night before, your time change is also a big factor if you were going to North America. So altitude, most of them are either sea level, or there's very few at altitude, like Boulder, for example. So you don't have to worry too much about that. But you need to work out if you can get proper, adequate conditioning for the terrain. So that's why I have the mileage thing there. Most of us get injured in the build-up, unfortunately, because we are trying to tack a lot of mileage to tackle the terrain. So there's quite a few considerations, and then once you get the course in your head, mapped out your perfect world, it's about how does it fit into your life, I feel. The timing you might need, you can see this might be a 2-year plan, but you've got to get quite sort of savvy, because it is every 2 years now. You have to start thinking about it in the off year. For example, 2025, you have to think about it for 2026. And that might make a decision. It might be an 18-month project. And actually, to be honest with you, a Kona project should take about 2 years. Some people are lucky, they get a roll down without expecting it. Maybe 8th place, 12th place, 15th place, depends how you choose your races, of course. So in summary, 18 to 24 months as a nice little program to try and plan your life with family, kids and schools and everything and work. And it takes this long to develop the bike, which means it's aerodynamics, testing, and fuel. Once you get that a bit sorted, you then obviously can have a much better marathon, and you actually don't have to do a lot of mileage on the run. As long as you are fairly conditioned, swim and bike, you can keep the mileage to not a minimum, you just, depending on your history, but that's where you're going to get unstuck with consistency of training by picking up injuries. More on that on a separate video. But I think if you work backwards from your goal you want to work towards and choose a race, it's going to be cost related, travel. If you can do it in your home country, even better from a cost perspective, but most importantly, you can go recce the course and you pretty much know the climate, the weather in that given month is going to be fairly predictable, and you can work backwards from that. So I hope that's been super helpful. Look through some of my other videos around fueling, how to maybe construct a program as well if you've stumbled on this, and some of my other videos around nutrition, and yeah, more to follow. Hope you enjoyed it. See you at Kona, hopefully. If you listen this far, I'm releasing a specific private video with a link in the description for one person, the right fit person that I'm going to take on, not just coaching, because I have a full roster of coached athletes. It's the unique opportunity to go all in, again, for the right person, wherever you are in the world, to spend 2 years with you to get you to your ultimate goal of racing in Kona and achieving a lifelong dream. If this is interest of you, watch the private unlisted video below.